Hey, this is Bernadette McClelland and welcome to The Influence Gap. This is the show where leaders come to close the gap between intention and impact so that they can have the right conversations, make the right decisions, and achieve the results that matter the most. Hey there, and welcome to this week's episode of The Influence Gap. And I've got a guest on today that is going to help any sales leader, any salesperson, any business owner really bridge that gap between the message that you want your team out there in the marketplace sharing and the impact that you know that they can make, as well as yourself. Park Howell is, as far as I'm concerned, an absolute authority when it comes to story. Now, I love a good story. We met a couple of years ago. He had me on his podcast, and I'm so rapt to have him on the show today because he's going to share with you a practical formula for you to use to incorporate story, whether it's in your prospecting, whether it's in your emails, whether it's in your conversation, whether it's in any form of relationship building. So buckle up. Park Howell, he's an Emmy Award-winning branding expert. He's got an amazing podcast called The Business of Story. He's written a couple of books, and you're going to love what he has to share. So buckle up and let's get into this week's show here on The Influence Gap. Park Howell, welcome to The Influence Gap. I'm super excited about having you on today.
Oh, Bernadette, thank you so much for having me here. This is great.
You know, I think time flies so fast. It was 4 years ago, last week or last month, that we landed in America, and I'm from Australia. And Alice Hyman, I think, introduced us. I can't remember, but we had a conversation, and then you had me on your show.
Yeah. And I think also we have anecdote in common that you did some work with them, as did I many years ago. So Sean Callahan and the gang over there.
Yeah, Mike Adams, who wrote the 7 stories that every salesperson must know, or one of those. Great guys. And so, yes, story is a big thing for me as well. So, talking about story, What is your story? I mean, I can go back about Twinkies and music and cutting firewood and all of that stuff. And seriously, if someone wants to read a bio that is a story that just gets you in, go to businessofstory.com. So your story, you had your own ad agency, and then you had a big shift, like an aha moment.
I did.
Yeah, tell us about that, because this is a.
Yeah, well, as you know, I have been in the advertising, branding, marketing world for 40 plus years. And I ran my own ad agency, Park Co. out of Phoenix, Arizona for 20 of those years, from 1995 to about 2015. My big aha moment came early in the 2000s when, this whole idea concept of story and storytelling started bubbling up in our world. And I'm like, well, yeah, isn't that obvious? And then the more I studied it, the more I realized that people weren't really using story very effectively in branding and so forth. And, Bernadette, we're all intuitive storytellers, just being Homo sapiens, storytelling apes, if you will. And I even found it in our own work that when we weren't intentional about it, following frameworks and story structures, that our campaigns were less effective. And so that was kind of my first aha moment. And I thought, I better study story a little bit more and really understand what goes into it. And so our son Parker was going to film school at Chapman University at the time. This is 2006, and a very prominent film school. And I said, send me your books and your recorded lectures when you're done with them, since I'm paying for them, because I want to know what Hollywood knew about storytelling. And then I found, of course, The Hero's Journey, which inspired my 10-step story cycle system. Yeah. Then I met Dr. Randy Olson, and he taught me the and, but, therefore framework, what I call the DNA of storytelling.
Yep.
And I kept moving forward. My customers, clients came to me and said, wow, our campaigns are going great. Would you start teaching our people and our leaders about what you've learned about these story structures and how we can apply them? That's when I kind of left the agency world and truly became a teacher. That was my next calling in life. So, Bernadette, when I was 55 years old, People thought I was nuts, but I off-ramped out of my ad agency and I built the business of story. And now all I do is consult, teach, coach, and speak on the power of story around the world. And I get to work with some of the biggest brands ever, which I never got to do as an ad guy, but I was a story guy.
I love that. And, I'm just going to rewind a little bit when you said the word framework. And it's, as we mentioned before, we've both worked in that story world. And what I've noticed, like when we talk about salespeople and the sales environment, there's this whole kind of thought process. They've got the gift of the gab and they're really great storytellers, and which around the barbecue they probably are, lacking structure, which is probably the intention that you're talking about. But when I've worked with technical people, they kind of like go story, not into story, not into sales. Those two words don't go together for technical people. However, what I've noticed in working with the technical people is because they love structure so much, once they can wrap their head around the fact that story is, you've got a structure, they are actually the best storytellers.
Yeah.
That's what I've found. So when you talk about structure, what do you mean by frameworks and structure?
Well, and let's think about it from the technical aspect, because I've run in the same thing with, developers and coders and just big tech people. They're like, no. And the way I explain it to them for everyone else is, think of storytelling as the software that drives the hardware of our meaning-making limbic brain. So when you use a structure, like one of my all-time favorites is Dr. Randy Olson, who is a Harvard PhD evolutionary biologist, so he knows something about brain structures and the human being. He's also a USC Film School grad, and he has written books teaching scientists and academics how to use story, in particular the and, but, therefore framework. 3 words. Bernadette, it seems so basic it couldn't possibly work, but I have found this to be the most dynamic 3-word story structure going. You have the and, statement of agreement. So you're speaking from your audience's point of view, and you're sharing a shared vision of here's what you want and here's why that's important to you. Then you introduce the but, which is the statement of contradiction, the problem. But you're super frustrated because of this major gap that's standing in your way. The therefore is your statement of consequence or your resolution. So imagine how easy your life is going to be when you close the gap by using our product or service. Setup, problem, resolution. It's just simply feeding your complex message in a very simple, powerful way to that limbic brain, which is a very much of a pattern-seeking, problem-solving, decision-making, buying brain. And so start with the ABT. That is the DNA of storytelling, and everything builds off of that.
So effectively, you could use the ABT framework for getting appointments, for emails, for phone conversations, for leading into a demonstration, for proposal. So you could actually use the ABT continuously throughout your dialogue with anybody, really.
Yeah. And it's a lot easier than the hero's journey, than the Pixar way, and all those multi-step ways, because when you use it enough, you really build this narrative intuition of setup, problem, resolution. Think about it. Here's a fun little deal I like to do. It's a thought experiment, if you will. So let's go way back 70,000 years to the savannah, and you got your rotund cave mate Larry, and he's sitting safely by the fire in the cave, and he looks out, and here's his buddy Thog all disheveled in the doorway, and Larry goes, "Thog, where you been?" And Thog says, "Well, I was down a river trying to catch saber-toothed salmon for dinner." And Larry goes, "Uh-huh." And Thog says, "But saber-toothed tigers show up." Larry goes, "Uh-oh, what'd you do?" "Therefore, I give salmon to tiger. It likes salmon better than Thog. Therefore, I'm safely back here at fire with you." So you've got story structure in 3 grunts. Uh-huh. Uh-oh. Uh-huh.
Oh my God.
It literally was the very first technology we Homo sapiens used to not just survive the savannah, but to evolve into the consumers we are today.
Yeah, sorry, I'm laughing because I'm actually just picturing a couple of salespeople with the grunts. But anyway, so if we're talking about that environment, building businesses, generating revenue, sales environments, they're mainly trained on pipeline and process and tactics and all of that. So we know that their story plays a pivotal part in that. What's the cost to a business, do you think, by not incorporating strategically story into their conversations?
Well, I could prove it. I mean, there's absolute ROI to it. Now, your show is, the influence gap, right? Let's close that gap. So, for instance, back in 2022, I was doing work with a very large global SaaS provider out of Denver called Trimble. And they were running 5 LinkedIn campaigns in 5 different countries and 5 different languages. And they were having some success. They were getting about 3% engagement. And LinkedIn says anything over 1 or 1.2% is pretty good. So we took their March campaign, took that copy, and all I did is reformat it because, of course, it was very much logic, reason-driven, features, functions, a little bit of benefits sprinkled in there, but it was all about the brand, not about the audience. So I simply took that copy, and I didn't rewrite it, that it was a Emmy Award-winning copy. I just reformatted it. I used the and, but, therefore. I did it in English because I couldn't speak all these other languages. And then they simply translated it into those other languages. And you know what? In April 2022, Bernadette, they saw a 400% increase in engagement in their LinkedIn campaign. And all we did differently was reformulate it as an and, but, therefore. That's closing the influence gap.
Absolutely is. So that is really diving into the limbic part of the brain, because they say, emotions before logic. Whereas a lot of people, I think, still are going with the logic first. Why do you think that is? Even if they have a framework, but still that influence isn't being achieved. What do you think is missing there?
Well, storytelling's hard. We're not really ever taught how to tell stories. So it only makes sense when these very bright men and women are in the tech world and they're thinking, our product is the best. And that's another thing that they lead with, what they make versus what they actually make happen in their audience's life. But it's understandable because they want to look smart. They want to look progressive. They want to be on top of their game. So they're going to lead with executive functioning reason, when our brains are completely built to first lead with emotion. What's in it for me? How are you going to solve this really annoying, frustrating, scary 3 emotions problem for me? How am I going to feel when you solve this problem? Oh, now come back in, support everything with your logic and reason, right?
Yeah.
I had an analogy the other day. It hit me when I was on another podcast. Have you been to Amsterdam?
I have.
Have you ever been to the Amsterdam Museum? It's a small little museum on how they built Amsterdam. And Amsterdam, I suppose like Venice, is just on top of all of these pillars, these posts, these centuries-old wooden pilings they built Amsterdam on. But when you walk through that city, you're walking through a storybook. Your emotions are just like, this is the most beautiful place. The Dutch are such wonderful people. The food's great. And so that's the story sitting on top of the supports. Your logic and your reason, your features and functions are the supports that hold up, that story that you want to tell and get your customers to live.
So I agree, and Amsterdam is beautiful, by the way, too. Yeah. So you mentioned a word in what you were sharing there. You mentioned the word brand. Now, all of us have a brand. You have a meaning behind the word brand.
Yeah.
What's your meaning? Because we're all in a world today where it is so noisy that we are all trying to differentiate ourselves and rise above the noise. And personal brand comes into that. So when it comes to story, what's your meaning behind the word brand?
Yeah, well, I'm going to borrow a term that inspired me from Jeff Bezos, like him or not, with Amazon. And he said a brand is what people say about you when you're not in the room. And I liked that a lot, but I changed it a little bit, of course, business of story. I think a brand is the story people tell about you when you're not in the room. So they can say stuff about you that's this, but when they actually tell a story, they're actually closing that influence gap with whoever is sitting in there. So you better have indoctrinated your story into them through not only how you share your brand story, but how they experience it, how you've invited them into it, how you have fulfilled the promises you've made in your brand storytelling so that they become your brand storyteller. So I like to think of that. It's the story people tell about you when you're not in the room.
Yeah, I love that. And that is intentional. So you have to actually do some work around that.
Yeah.
Because the intuitive part that you mentioned before is really just off the cuff.
Yeah.
And that is actually emotional for us, isn't it?
Well, I think about that like, off the cuff. Do you want to move from winging it to winning it?
Yeah, absolutely.
And I learned this the hard way. We were doing a campaign back in 2003 through my agency for Goodwill of Central and Northern Arizona. Brand new client for us. And we did all of our due diligence and our branding. And we started with the first TV campaign. There were 2 spots. Well, Bernadette, one spot pulled unbelievably well. I mean, they had same store sales the next month increased by as much as 42%. The other spot, bupkis, didn't do anything, just sat there. I mean, they even pulled it after a month and said, well, this isn't remotely moving the needle. And I didn't know why, because we love both of those like we love all of our kids, just one was performing differently than another. So it was before I really started studying story. And after I got those books from Hollywood, and I looked at those 2 spots and I realized the first one was perfect story structure with some humor put in there, speaking directly to the audience, saying, look, we get you. And so come on in and, we shop at Goodwill. The other one was just a really creative, fun spot that we created, I think, for our egos, for ourselves. That was my aha moment. We were being intuitive in both cases. One, we naturally landed on story. The other one, we didn't. That's when I said we need to evolve from being intuitive to intentional every single time. So we would run all of our work through the story cycle system, the but therefore framework, and make sure we were truly sharing a setup, problem, resolution, 3-act structured story.
Great stuff. This is really, really, really important. One thing I'd love for you to share is that when you did make the shift to go into storytelling, into the world of story, it was at a time when digital marketing had come in.
Yeah, well, it had been here. I mean,
right.
It had come in, and I realized that the branding work we had been doing and the traditional advertising we were doing, while still, story was the answer to all of that. It was before I really understood story. I realized what we had been doing was no longer nearly as effective. And now we're talking 2001 to 3-ish in there, right? And digital marketing came in, and it was just a cacophony of communication. What I would tell our clients is, look, you used to own the influence of mass media, but now the masses have become the media, and they own your story. So you had better get your story straight and be able to communicate with them. And that was one of my other real impetuses, empathy. To really understand story and the timing. The universe blessed me with our son going to film school. And that's when I started really studying story. And that all comes 20 years earlier, Bernadette, when I was going through university. I got a degree in communications, so I could, function in the advertising world. But I also got a second degree in music composition and theory because I just love writing music. Then advance, and I started realizing, all I'm learning here is the composition and theory of story, so that I can go out and coach people how to do this. And that led to a professorship at Arizona State University, where I taught a master's program in sustainable storytelling for 5 years. And the doors just opened up to me. And that's when I shut the door on my old ad agency ways and do what I do today.
Follow your bliss.
Yeah.
So what are your thoughts then, if digital marketing created that kind of a shift, what are your thoughts around AI and creativity today?
I love it. I am so tired of hearing the whining about AI. And here's the thing, from a brand guy, right? I was driving back from a training I was doing down in South Texas, a business of story mastery course I was training. And I was driving back, it was about 2.5 hours back, and I was thinking about that. And I go, what a horrible brand name for the most revolutionary technology any of us have ever experienced in our lives. Artificial intelligence. That's what they make. But what do they actually make happen? To me, I reframe it from artificial to artful intelligence.
Oh, that's nice. I like that.
When you bring yourself to it, when you bring your market knowledge, your customer insights, your own influence and persuasive skills, then artificial intelligence actually starts augmenting. So you could even say augmented intelligence augments what you do and how you can scale it. Now, where it gets really super fake and phony and hallucinates is when people just go, all right, write me a blog post about this. Boom, done. Great. Thanks. Put it out there. Everybody knows what you're doing. Everybody. But if you bring yourself to it and then collaborate with it, it truly becomes artful intelligence. And that's why I think it's one of the most marvelous inventions we've ever had.
I agree. I totally agree. And I mean, to those people listening that are just using it for slop, it is, isn't it? That's the new term, slop.
Your influence gap is going to grow, grow, grow.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So, story is a humongous component to influence. We know that categorically. And that gap that we're talking about, where a sales leader, a CEO, goes from being good to absolutely great. What are you seeing, whether it's a story they're telling themselves, but what are you seeing that's keeping them stuck on the good side of that spectrum rather than great?
I'll tell you, it's one word. And. There we go. Here's the deal. People think they're telling a story, and what they're really doing is ending their audience to death. They never get out of what Hollywood call is exposition or act one. And then this happened, and then we did this, and then this thing went happen, and then this guy showed up, and then we tried to do this, and then that didn't really happen.
Yeah.
Use one and then throw it out, get to that but. Then to the therefore. Then you can add another but to it. And then the therefore. And if you need to add a little bit to the therefore, you go, therefore this, and this, but then this. Keep that pulse going through your communications. The other thing I would say is people get stuck on thinking they have to tell some big epic story. Yeah. And there's one word now I want them to think about when it's like, no, it's actually a lot easier than that. Think in moments and anecdote. They're big believers in this whole moment thing, but I've seen it throughout my life. Tell a story about a moment in your life when something changed. Look at you and I have been talking here, and I probably have already shared 5 or 6 anecdotal moments that taught me something, spurred me in another direction, curiosity in moving forward. Those little moment stories are what people, our Homo sapien brains, actually really care about.
I agree. And with the moments, for those, listening or watching that maybe don't know what another example, I suppose, of what we mean is when you can actually say, and Park and I were on this show, and Park was saying moments are what matters.
Yeah.
Or I can say Park and I were on the show, and Park said, you know what, Bernadette? Moments are what matters. Yeah. So it's when you put dialogue into it as well. It just connects with the brain on such a different level. Yeah. So I'm so glad.
Let's have some fun with that. Let's have some fun with that, Bernadette.
Yeah.
So you've got this new wonderful podcast.
Yes.
And podcasts are hard. They take a lot of time and effort. I know I've had my Business of Story show for almost 11 years now, 564 episodes. So it's quite an undertaking. So Bernadette, take us to that moment when you said, yes, I'm going to do it. What was it that finally spurred you to do that?
You know what? It was about probably about 6 or 7 weeks ago.
Timestamp. Okay.
And I was sitting downstairs in the lounge with my husband, Tim.
Location stamp.
And I said to him, honey, I am going to start my show again, The Sales Leader of Influence, because when I did it last time, it was late last year, it was solo. And I thought for me to really tap into what matters to leaders, sales leaders today, which is their role to get growth and whatnot for their sales team and their business, I said, there's one thing wrong with what I'm doing. And that is I haven't got great people to interview yet. And he said, so what are you going to do about it? And I said, I know exactly what I'm going to do about it. I said, I'm going to change the name to the Influence Gap. I'm going to hire a producer, and I'm going to help those sales leaders move from good to great by closing the influence gap. And here we are today. I've got an amazing guest.
I love it. I love it. And you see, I've got this gap right here. That's my influence gap. I use it to tell stories to close the gap of my relationships with people.
Yeah. So there you go. So for me, it was sitting down and I was trying to put a story to that, going with structure. But for me, it really was all about closing that gap between a sales leader's message that they want to impart to the team and the impact that they want to make. And that created a whole different shift in my thinking. And it was a story. There was a story there. So thank you for that.
That's a great example, folks. That's how you do it. If you want to show your product or service in action or an initiative you're trying to get your people to buy into, and you've got that gap in there, they're like, oh, we like status quo. We think it's safe. Don't make me change. Well, there's a good example of how you use story. And what I like to do is use the anecdote and the ABT as a 1-2 punch. The ABT in under 15 seconds to set up the story. So you want this and it's important to you because of this, but you're super frustrated because of this. Therefore, imagine when you get it by doing this with me. For instance, boom, you get into that story in under 90 seconds. You've used two very powerful story softwares, story structures, the ABT and the 5 primal elements of a short story to speak to that limbic brain, that heart. And then when they're like, wow, okay, tell me more. Then you start propping it up like those pillars prop up Amsterdam with your reason and your logic and your support points.
I love that. I love that. So while we're talking about influence gaps, what is the space between where your story reaches now and where you want your story to go?
For my own story.
Yes.
Well, there has always been a huge gap in customers, clients, small to medium-sized businesses having world-class branding that they can actually afford, and that doesn't take an agency 6 months to create. And so, as you know, we've put your brand through it. We created the Story Cycle Genie. It took us 2 years, and it's based off of my 10-step story cycle system, which guides it. And at the core of it, Bernadette, as you know, is the and, but, therefore. This is a short little book I wrote with Dr. Randy Olson on how to use the and, but, therefore in business communications. And so now what we have done is democratized branding so that everybody can use it, have it, and afford it with our Story Cycle Genie. And it's the only platform that is really built off of story and narrative frameworks, the and, but, therefore, 5 primal elements of a short story in our 10-step story cycle system. So everything that comes out of it is in your voice and has story structure naturally already built into it. And a lot of people in your viewers might be wondering, well, Park, did you just knock off Story Brand? Isn't that what they do? No. I had actually been doing the story cycle system brand development 8 years before Donald Miller introduced Story Brand. I come at branding as a brand architect. He comes at branding as a storytelling philosopher, because his whole thing was always your personal story. You've got to live into a more powerful personal story, which I admire him. He's a marvelous guy, a great writer and whatever. So they've given you a 7-step framework that anybody can use. And so everybody kind of sounds the same. Our Story Cycle Genie is different in that it enables you, because everyone has an important story to tell. They can feel it, they just can't find it. Our Story Cycle Genie helps you find it, and then helps you build out your entire story environment so that people are telling the right story when you're not in the room. And it learns with every iteration. So it is always collaborating with you and growing smarter. And so that's my next big thing, is how can I close that gap for companies and leaders to get world-class branding, not over months, but in an hour or two or a day or two, not spend $50,000, but maybe $50 to $100 with our Story Cycle Genie. And you know what? Sure, it's AI driven, but it's artful intelligence.
Yes, and I've been through it. So, and you're talking about iterations. So, you know, was probably an iteration ago that I went through it. And it's very, very simple, and it's very, very powerful. And I would encourage people to follow you up on that. Speaking of which, how can people connect with you, contact you, trial?
Sure.
You know, how can people do that? Get your books. I mean, there's so much that you've dug so deep into it. I mean, this is truly authority in story.
Yeah.
So,
Well, thank you, Bernadette. Yeah. First, they can actually go and test the strength of their brand story for free with our story diagnostic tool at storycyclegenie.ai. Costs you nothing. You put in no credit card, put in your name, your email address, and the URL of your website. And in about 60 seconds, the Story Cycle Genie is going to give you a grade from A+ to F- and a 14-point storytelling assessment that will validate what you're already doing well with your story, reveal gaps that you can quickly fix, and even inspire you with new ways to think about your brand story. Then, of course, if you're ready to really start building your brand brain within the Story Cycle Genie, sign up. You build the brain, and then after that, you can do all your strategy and everything else. And we even have a money-back guarantee that if you are not 100% enthralled with what the Genie creates for you in month one, we will return your month one subscription, and you keep all of the assets you created. So storycyclegenie.ai. And then for me, reach out on LinkedIn. And if you're not on LinkedIn, go over to businessofstory.com, hit my contact page, shoot me a note, let me know that you heard me on Bernadette's wonderful show here, so I have some context about who's showing up. And then if I can be of support to you in any way, shape, or form, whether it's training your people how to tell stories, whether it's helping you to really refine and define your brand story, or anything else to help you close that influence gap, I'm here for you. Yeah,
absolutely. I love it. Now, before we finish, I have what I call a rapid fire.
All
so,
right.
one word answers. A little bit of fun. Take a sip. So, one word answers, and I'll have 5 of them for you. So, here we go. Stories are
powerful.
Brands need
stories.
Creativity is
brilliance.
Leadership is.
Oh, that's a good one. Leadership is influence.
And influence leads to
impact.
I love it. Park, it's been an absolute pleasure to have you on. You are a wealth of knowledge when it comes to story, and you live it and you walk your talk, which is what I absolutely respect. I want everybody to follow you up, and I just want to say a huge thank you.
Well, Bernadette, thank you so much. It's always a privilege to speak with you, and an absolute honor to be on the resurrection of your show.
Thank you so much.
I love it.
Thank you. And here's to democratization of story. I believe that too. Well, thank you very much to everybody watching and listening. Remember that influence doesn't happen unless you create change within you. in order to create change around you. So have an amazing rest of the day, and we will see you here this time next week. Bye for now. That's a wrap on today's episode of The Influence Gap. If this resonated with you, share it with a CEO or a sales leader who you think needs to hear it. And make sure that you subscribe so that you never miss one single episode. If you are ready to close the gap between your message and the impact you want to make, come and find me at BernadetteMcClelland.com. I'll see you this time next week. Bye for now.